by psyopticnerve. Those who bear the bitter bite of a dark northern winter may know of the voices the season brings. On the many dismal, frigid nights where the wind threatens to take the door from its hinges and you can never get the fire blazing hot enough, they grow louder. Disembodied whispers that seep in through any skin left exposed and linger in your ears just long enough that they cannot be dismissed as imagination.
We are hungry, we are starved, we are but skin and bone. We must eat, we must eat, we must.
I despair that it is true, and I beg of you to leave me be, I mutter, idly watching the flames dance upon the logs. Frothing crimson juice, there is life yet, in sticky red death. An image comes to me as I gaze into the fire. A pack of wolves before the carcass of an elk, intestines spilling forth, steaming in the frozen air, feasting, tearing, snarling, hidden behind their cold yellow eyes. Have they remorse? The logs have nearly been reduced to ash as I ponder this. The chill that replaces the roaring flames finally wakes me from my trance. I have been dreading the short journey I must now take for some time, out into the vicious wind and blinding snow to the woodshed. The path my footsteps made on my last outing have long since been buried in a sea of white, and I struggle to pull the sled behind me. All the while, the voices follow.
Lay upon the ground, sleep. A thawing corpse comes spring, to be devoured by beasts, and never know the pain it brings.
I tell you, leave me be! I bellow, retreating inside the meager shelter of the woodshed, shivering, quaking, my hands and feet numb, and desperate to be warmed by the hearth. I rolled the first log to the chopping block, only to find that the hatchet is not wedged within. It is nowhere to be found. It cannot be inside the cabin. It simply cannot be there. I made sure never to bring it there. I would never. Back out into the blizzard, stumbling blindly. The voices linger, coming to me in fragments.
Upon the ground, let memory sleep. It will be better this way.
The room is dark. I can just make them out as I attempt to strike the match, their sleeping forms too silent and still to be caused by an ordinary slumber. The feeble flame illuminates the hatchet resting beside the bed, stained and accusatory. Their skeletal faces leer up at me. All of their flesh, all of their sustenance has been stripped from the bone. Please, please, children, have mercy on me. Their voices are fading as the snow covers me, drifting farther away.
We know that you were hungry, Mother. We know that you must eat. You must eat. You must.
Until all I have left is remorse. Blood in the Snow. Unknown author. Damn it! I was leaving a trail of blood in the snow, like a path of breadcrumbs for the others. I tried to apply more pressure on the wound in my abdomen to stop the bleeding, but it was no use. I was like a stuck pig, thrashing against the hunter's spear, delaying the inevitable feast. It wasn't fair what I was doing. We had all agreed to the game and understood it was the only way we could all survive until we were rescued. Someone had to make the ultimate sacrifice so that the rest could live. I had drawn the short straw. I was to be eaten, and now I was being selfish. But I just couldn't help it. Even though I had agreed to the terms, once I saw that short straw, my lizard brain took over immediately. I had to escape. I had to get away from the hungry faces of my friends. I had to survive. I could hear them whooping and hollering like a pack of hyenas as they trailed behind me. My lungs burned as I sucked in the winter air. I felt dizzy from the blood loss. I could still feel Michael's knife in my gut, how it had slowly slipped into me after we had wrestled over it. I spotted a nook in a deciduous tree and clambered into it after throwing some fresh powder over the blood trail, making my body as small as possible. After a moment, I heard the group come crashing through the forest, maybe 50 yards away from me. I held my breath and said a prayer that they wouldn't find me. They were speaking in hushed tones at first, but then grew louder in frustration. I was their meal, and they couldn't find me, but I was so close and they knew it. I bet they could almost taste it, mouths salivating at the thought of sinking their teeth into my liver. Suddenly there was a scream, and then a great commotion. Twigs and limbs snapped as what sounded like a locomotive barreling through the trees. More screams, then a mighty roar that sent chills down my spine. What in God's name? Crying, weeping screams, then gnashing of teeth and the sounds of bones breaking. I couldn't see anything, and I dared not look. And then there was silence. And subtle, wet chewing. The sun was beginning to set before I finally heard whatever it was walk off into the distance. I peeked out from my hiding place. Nothing. I made my way over to where I'd heard the group. They were in pieces. Enormous bear tracks formed a circle around the slaughter. A single tear escaped my eyes before I bent down and began shoveling bits of my friends into my mouth, swallowing as much meat as I could to sat the hunger. I took the short straw from my coat pocket and sat it in the middle of the devastation. I had to survive. Winter's Sacrifice by Evan the Nerd 83. "Please," said his father, "and give her back." The boy could barely hear him over the screaming wind, the shrieking storm. Snow had begun to pile up. Heaps of ice jutted from an ocean that stretched into the horizon. Now, his father couldn't take a single step without stumbling. "Please!" Something pelted his naked body. Hail. But he didn't feel it. He couldn't feel anything. Nerves frozen and useless, and overwhelmed by the deep chill. Everything was so cold. So cold. "Please!" It had been an hour. Mom hadn't come back. She had left them. Walked out the front door, despite his father's warnings, his begging and crying. She had to go out. She would take Amy's place. Amy would rejoin them in the cabin. But no. "Give her back!" They had waited. Amy hadn't knocked. "Give her back!" His father had cried and cried. "Give me my wife!" But not for Amy. Never for Amy. "Take him!" And not even for him. As his father raised him higher, the storm would only scream. Avoiding the Storm by psyopticnerve. It hasn't snowed yet this winter. Bare trees and dead patches of grass that are usually made more palatable by blankets and drifts of white loam outside the windows, like corpses that were never buried. It makes it difficult to keep from wandering into the darker corners of the mind and ruminating on the inevitability of that final moment that awaits us. Thick, wet coughs come from down the hall, the kind that sound as though they have clawed their way out of the lungs, struggling against one another to be the first to escape. A few seconds of breathless gasping go by before they return. I wait outside the door once the fit subsides, wondering if I should enter. After a minute of silence, I retreat. This is what they told me it would be like at the end. The endless parade of grave-faced doctors and specialists who'd I'd encountered during the months prior. They had only been words then, almost meaningless. Just as meaningless as the reassurances they gave me about how strong and supportive I was being. As meaningless as telling her she was brave in the face of certain death. She'd wanted to be home when it happened. She had insisted. She'd refused hospice or at-home care. She wanted to be with me, and only me, in our home for the little time she had. I'd done my best to make her as comfortable as possible, dutifully attending to her minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day. That's all she had left, they told me. It was only a matter of days. Those days turned to weeks, and now over a month, into the dead of winter, and still not a single flake has fallen from the sky. Yet the clouds above are dark, billowing, brooding. The air around me swirls, and I sigh. It is finally here. She is awake when I return inside. Her frail body seems to have sunken into the bed. Her eyes pierce mine from behind hollow sockets, the only remnants of the vibrant woman she had been only a short while ago. "You'll never guess, dear," I say. "It's snowing outside. I want to see." She gives a faint smile, her voice like rustling leaves. "Of course." I grip her gently, turning her over to face the window. "Beautiful, isn't it? So beautiful. So beautiful." The flakes drift to the ground, slowly accumulating. Slowly. We watch them for a while. When I finally bring myself to look back, she is blanketed by the white of the linen and the pillow held over her face. The house is much too still without her. Final. Absolute. I find myself back in the blizzard, holding my shaking hands open to the sky above to catch the furious flakes. In the warmth of my palm, they begin to melt, before dripping a dark crimson onto the unblemished white at my feet. The calls coming from Shadow Tree Lane. It's Friday night, and Dolores Del Monte is in the middle of hour 60 of the work week at the call center. She's a 911 operator, and while she enjoys her job and finds it rewarding, there have been days throughout her 10 years that have stuck with her. Rough days, to be honest. Certain calls, certain voices that haunt her, not knowing what happened after the call hung up. Were they alive? Were they dead? And sadly, in some cases, she did find out what had happened. It truly can be a grueling job, with its ups and downs, and the downs can be especially tough, taking a mental toll on one's emotions, as many current and former dispatchers can attest to. Over the past year, however, Dolores has been plagued with a rash of calls that have almost driven her to the brink. They have given her nightmares, put first responders she has sent to the call in danger, and has given her superiors pause and questioning her abilities to continue to perform in an adequate fashion. The eerie part about all of this, some might say even spooky, is that this particular string of calls and incidences have all come from the same home. It started a year ago tonight, Halloween Eve. Dolores had already been on shift for hours and was beginning to get tired when she received the call. 3425 Shadow Tree Lane was the address. A woman was on the other line, frantic, almost sounding like she was fighting for her life. Dolores quickly sprung into action, asking her name, location, and what the problem was. Cool, calm, and collected, like the grizzled dispatch veteran she was, the woman on the other line kept screaming, repeatedly saying, "He's going to kill me. Please send help." She was finally able to get the woman's name, which was Clara, and she told her to hide and that help was on the way. Clara said she had locked herself in the bathroom and that the man was outside the door trying to get in. Dolores told her to stay put, that help was almost there. About 2 minutes before police arrived at the scene, Dolores heard the door being broken down. Loud thuds and cracks could be heard in the background as an axe was destroying the door. Then a deafening, blood-curdling scream from Clara rang out. Then the call went dead. Nothing but silence. Dolores urgently told the first responders to hurry. They said they had just arrived and were approaching the front door. Dolores could hear them kick the front door open, and when they entered, all she heard were their confused reactions. One officer could be heard saying, "What the hell is going on here?" The other asked Dolores, where was the caller calling from? What room? Dolores told him she had barricaded herself in the back bathroom, and to hurry because a man had just broken in. She heard the officers moving. They shouted police. "Come out with your hands up. Put any weapons on the ground and put your hands behind your head." Then silence. It seemed like the silence lasted forever. It was broken by one of the officers asking if the address was correct. The other officer in the background could be heard saying, "What the hell is this? Some kind of Halloween prank?" Dolores said, "Yes, the address was correct. And if they had found Clara." The officer sounded confused and responded, "The house was abandoned. They searched the entire home and no one was there." Dolores sat stunned. Then she heard the officer say it was probably a prank, then hung up. But she knew it wasn't a prank, and she knew the location was correct. That call haunted her for weeks, but sadly, that was just the first. The calls just kept getting worse and worse, with even injuries to first responders being sustained. There was nothing she could do. Every call kept coming from the home on Shadow Tree Lane, but every time the calls were responded to, the officers were met with the silence of an abandoned home. A few officers even getting injured by falling debris from the home being as old as it was. The calls Dolores received from the location ranged from children in distress to domestic disturbances, murders, heart attacks, all horrific and all that continued to haunt her to this day. The voices that called out to her for help, she can still hear when she closes her eyes to go to bed. The house has been abandoned for years, yet no one knows why calls are still coming from the property. There's no electricity, and the phone lines haven't been connected with the phone company in ages. Paramedics and police stopped responding after multiple first responders were injured because of the old, dilapidated house. Dolores in her free time researched the property's history, trying to give herself some peace of mind, and what she uncovered was quite disturbing. In 1962, the original owners, Mark and Clara Downs, moved into the home. Not long after Mark horrifically murdered Clara while she was on the phone to police. Dolores's eyes widened when she read the name Clara. That was her. She just knew it. But how? She's been dead for decades. Then Dolores continued down the list of owners and their families, and she realized she had received calls from multiple individuals on that list, even though they had all died horrific deaths. There had already been rumors that the house was haunted, jokes being made around the office and by the responders alike, hesitant whispers hoping it not to be true, not wanting to speak it into existence. But with this new information, Dolores knew it to be true. The home on Shadow Tree Lane was and is most definitely haunted. So if you're on duty and you receive a call coming from the house on Shadow Tree Lane, please hang up the call. I run a hotel. In the winter, terror comes to stay. Unknown author. Close season. It's the pits. I run a small hotel. I used to run it with my wife, but she left me because of her drinking. She did not go far. I see her in the local bar, sometimes sitting alone, hunched over a bottle, sometimes with her arm around a stranger. It hurts seeing her like that, but there is nothing I can do. Believe me, I tried. Now all I can do is try and keep busy and not think. Busy is easy during the summer. This is a tourist town. We are surrounded by verdant forest, overlooked by awe-inspiring mountains. The stresses of the hustle and bustle of the city are eased away by the beauty and serenity that greet you in every direction you look. There are thousands of visitors here over the summer, and I am always fully booked and run off my feet. Come autumn, though, and the flow of tourists slows to a trickle. The first bite of cold winds swirling through the streets encourages any left to pack up and leave. Soon after, the snows come, and the road into town becomes impassable until next spring. Nature rules here, as she once did across whole continents. We cannot argue. Just make sure we are stocked up on essential supplies, our food and water and beer, and gasoline for the generators. I have a generator around the side of the hotel. It's relatively new, reliable. I finished thoroughly cleaning and checking it before I lock up the hotel for the winter. The summer, a memory. I try and make the most of the transformed town. On an early December day, I stand in the street outside my hotel, just as it is going dark, and listen to the near silence. There are 20 of us who see out the winter, and everyone else is indoors. There is no traffic on the road. The only sound I can hear is my generator purring efficiently, and the birds settling down to nest for the night. I try and savor the tranquility while it lasts. I breathe deep and take in the crisp, clean air. It's in the air that there is the first inkling. There's a smell. Slight at first, so slight you might think you were imagining it, but then it hits you. The smell of meat gone bad. Then there is a murmuring. Voices approaching. My fellow residents will be aware of this as well. The lights in their homes click off, one by one, leaving each in darkness behind drawn curtains. Only the streetlights remain. The birds have fallen silent. My heart is beating faster by now. It is cold outside, but colder deep within me. I will never get used to the fear that comes with this moment, or the terror that will linger for the months to come. The first of them appear. There are holes in their clothes, through which you can see the holes in their skin, the bones below. There is an urgency to their shuffling gait, and soon they are congregating around the streetlights, their faces turned up to them, their hands reaching out. I step silently as I can back into the hotel and extinguish the lights inside. I walk along now dark corridors and swing open the doors to the largest room in the hotel, go inside, and flick a switch. I did not close the front door of the hotel behind me, and within minutes I can smell them, hear their murmuring. I make my way to the far end of the room, wait by the smaller door there, holding it open, ready to flee. They file in, begin to fill the room until there are 100 or more, all crammed in. They stand gazing upwards, hands raised, in a kind of reverie. Some sway, some jerk and twitch. The object of their attention, the thing that has them drawn here, The disco ball in the center of the ballroom ceiling. It spins, casting out glittering light, bathing the room in speckles of red, green, blue, and silver. They are transfixed. I make my exit, hurry up to the second floor, which I have once again converted for the winter months into a compound. I have supplies, chemical toilets, doors reinforced with steel and bolted firm. They come every winter, and they stay. As long as the generator keeps going and the disco ball keeps spinning. Why do we put up with it? Why do we stay? Speaking for myself, for my wife, for the hope that she will come back to me. And because in early March a day will come when I can see the snow melting, I will crack open my window and feel the fresh air on my face. I will hear the birds singing again. It's then I know it's safe to leave my second floor compound. I walk down through the hotel. There's usually a little damage. Scrape marks on the walls. These can be painted over. Cracked window panes, easy to replace. I head into the ballroom, look through the open doors. The disco ball is still. The generator has run out of fuel, and the room is empty. They have left us until next winter. I go get my long broom and begin to sweep the ballroom floor. I sweep it all up and put it in a holdall. When in the next few weeks I drive down to the neighboring town, and after I have loaded up on fresh supplies for preparing for the first guests of the year, I will pay a visit to the pawn shop and empty out my holdall and cash in my findings. The dented coins, the rings, pendants, bracelets, gold teeth, the things they left behind as an offering in return for a winter of sparkling light. Winter Rain by GrantGorewood. My mother once told me about a thing she called winter rain. It first happened long ago in her small hometown in northern New Mexico during the Second World War. Her father was overseas, deployed to the Western Front. Her mother worked during the day to keep the old house, waiting for his return. And my mother, well, she was one who loved to watch the rain. She still does to this day. She used to say the rain had a beauty to it, yet sometimes it could turn dangerous. Acid rain may be terrible. Freezing rain may chill you to the bone. However, there is worse that can fall from the gray clouds overhead. My mother saw such a thing on that day in November, when she was inside staring out the window at the skies while waiting for her mother to return. Earlier that day, a burst of bright light had shimmered over the horizon past the mountains, testing at the far-off government site, she said. Usually harmless, nothing more than lights and rumbling. However, that day, as my grandmother, whom I never met, rounded the corner of the street on her way home, the rain began to fall. Thick white snow-like droplets fell from the sky, and to my mother's horror, where they landed, things began to die. My grandmother, initially unaware, stumbled as she walked down the street towards the house. As she got closer, my mother could see that her face was covered in boils, skin turning red and purple, eyes seeming to ooze, her clothes beginning to melt and stick to skin as hair dropped from her scalp. And worst of all, under her skin something seemed to be moving, squirming, like worms under wet soil. Then, as she reached the front steps to the house, my grandmother collapsed. My mother fought the urge to go outside and check, some sense of self-preservation keeping her from going outside. And as the rain continued to fall on that old metal house, she watched my grandmother's body slowly melt into multicolored liquid before being washed away with the pale rain, washing it away along with, as she put it, every living thing that the winter rain touched. When the storm ended, much of the town's vibrancy was gone. The land was, as my mother says, washed clean of all life that had been outside that day. She stayed inside until people in yellow and white suits with bubble heads arrived. My mother and the rest of those who had stayed indoors were relocated. The town itself was quarantined, and my grandmother, officially, she was, and still is, a missing person. However, my mother claims otherwise, insisting my grandmother was washed away by the chalk-white droplets of a torrent of winter rain. Stranger still, my mother claims that my grandmother is still alive. All of them are. They are simply resting, waiting for the next winter rain to wake them. Little Girl Shadow by Evan the Nerd, 83. In the winter moonlight, the shadow of a little girl falls on the front porch of a house at the far end of a street. The shadow knocks on the door. Jenny, the occupant of the house, is shaken from her sleep and stumbles out of bed. She opens the door, and she jolts back at the sight of a shadow standing in the doorway. "I'm sorry, but can I use your phone? Mommy left me at the mall, and I need to call her." It whispers, and Jenny hesitates. She doesn't want to let it in. She wants to slam the door in its dripping face. But she can't fight the urge to help. It's cold out, and the shadow is crying, white tears down black cheeks. Jenny reluctantly steps aside, and the shadow shifts inside in a flash. She closes the door, but the shadow isn't there when she turns around to face the living room. She's not completely alone, though, because the crackling fireplace starts to dim, and the room grows colder and colder. Jenny feels something on the back of her neck, fingers tickling down to her spine. Goosebumps rise. Darkness envelops the house, and Jenny can't see anything after a while. Everything fades to a static, chill black. The spirit of winter soon consumes her, and she's never seen again. The Hanging Coat. Author deleted. We all know about this situation. It's one of the classic plots for many horror stories. A kid is lying awake in his bed, and what keeps him up tonight is the shadowy figure on the wall. Maybe it's just a coat. Someone might have hung it there. He can think that, but the only problem is he doesn't remember noticing it before going to bed. You see, the real horror happens inside our head, and from now on, there can be countless possible endings for this story. You can reveal it as a ghost, a monster, a serial killer, etc. Or you can simply tell the readers it's just a coat hanging there for some reason you can't come up with, making it a happy ending. But for me, it's completely different. I'm watching him right now, and I know he's awake, perhaps a little bit scared as well. I can tell from his movement under the blanket that he's having a hard time figuring out what he's looking at. His father's coat is the only thing protecting my body from the winter's air. Despite how cold it is, I must not move or make any sound. It's kind of ironic that I'm sure I feel much more terrified than he does. I can only hope he won't be too scared that he goes and wakes his father up. Their house is just one big maze, so complicated that finding the way out seems almost impossible. And as my muscles begin to shake uncontrollably, I start to regret my decision to escape from the basement. This poor boy will never realize what his father has done to me and the others down there. That man is the real monster in this story. As for tonight, I just want to be nothing more than his coat. It's been 8 hours, and I'm starting to get warm. Unknown author. It's been 8 hours. 8 hours, I mouthed to myself. I've watched the little day-glow hand on my watch revolve 8 times in the near dark, alternating between the watch and the basement door. I've gone through 2 emergency candles, each one supposedly rated for 5 hours of burn time. There's only one left in the pack, and she's been down there for 8 solid hours. Jan! I try in the loudest whisper I can muster. Jan! Are you okay? The storm outside has picked up considerably in the last hour or so. At least 2 inches of bluish snow have built up on the juniper bushes outside the front bay window. Jan! I try again, leaning forward on the couch. I pull the flannel shawl around my shoulders as tightly as I can. My nose and lips have long since stopped burning from the cold. I can't feel them at all now. She was only supposed to check the circuit breaker. Don't move, Mom, she'd said 8 hours ago, when the light snapped out and the furnace fan slowed to a crawl. I'll check the breaker and be right back. That had almost been a deal breaker for this house. Jan had talked about it like a big positive. All electric, stove, furnace, the works. No gas bill to worry about. No sooty fireplace. New construction, hyper-modern, and even a solar panel to help defray the grid costs. I haven't walked in almost 50 years. I haven't used a manual chair in 25. Jan helps me out of bed, into the shower, onto the toilet. I consider flopping forward onto the hard wood, hoping upon hope that I don't shatter something on the way down. Maybe I could creep along the floor, then to the basement door. Maybe I can find out what happened to Jan. Maybe I could even slither down the stairs. I can picture it, but I can't imagine my arms going through the motions. I take a look at them. My skin looks like translucent wax paper, wound around bones, shot through with skinny blue veins. It's been 8 hours, but her cell phone might still have a charge. Mine's upstairs. It might as well be on the moon. What could have happened to her down there? A fall? Something with a circuit breaker? I take a deep breath. Jan! I try again. Now I'm getting frightened. I've read a story once about a man lost in the woods who struggles to get a fire going. He says that freezing to death is miserable, till the end. Then your body releases one last gush of warmth and a brain-killing endorphin shot. You get warm and comfortable and sleepy. And I'm starting to get very warm. Winter Morning by Monechetti. The man woke up one winter morning to a curious set of circumstances. A knife was buried in the headboard of his bed, about 6 inches from where his face had been sleeping prior. He carefully extracted himself from the covers and put his bare foot in a small puddle. His bed was surrounded in small puddles, the size of a young child's shoe. He followed the small puddles to his front door, which was wide open. His dog, a cocker spaniel, was tied to the porch swing. It whined dejectedly as he untied it. "What happened here, Parker?" he said to the dog, as he surveyed his yard and porch. Snowballs checkered the whole front of his house. His wind chimes were broken, and the lawn was filled with menacing snowmen, each sporting grotesque features. They were all facing his bedroom. Unlikely that was a coincidence, he thought. The watery footprints gave way to small tracks in the fresh fallen snow. They surrounded his house in circles over and over, with a particular collection of footprints at the base of his bedroom window. He slipped on his snow boots and coat over his pajamas, followed them through the field. There were at least 5 distinct sets of footprints, and they led him over a mile to the edge of his property. There, near the main road, was a house he rented to an elderly couple. They'd been good tenants for years, but he had recently told them he was increasing their rent by nearly double. Their reaction was extreme fear. It would be most of their monthly Social Security, they had said. But he was adamant. His brother had told him property values were going up all over, and he was intent on getting his money. Because of his last interaction with the couple, it made the fact that the tracks led to their house a bit awkward. He was angry because somebody had obviously gone through great lengths to prank him, but at the same time, his last conversation with a man and his wife was tense. He knocked at the door, and the old man answered. "Hello," said the old man. "Did you come to collect the new rent? I'm afraid we won't have it for another week." The landowner explained, rather sheepishly, that it appeared some children had vandalized his home and that the tracks had led to their house. The old man smiled and stated that there hadn't been children in their home for about 50 years. The landlord was thoroughly shaken at this point, and he rescinded his increase of the rent. Perhaps he had been too hasty, he said. He began the trek home through the snow. Gently closing the door, the old man told his wife that they didn't have to worry about finding money for the rent. She was overjoyed at the news, of course, but called her husband into the next room to show him something. "I found all of my porcelain dolls in disarray again this morning," she said. "And what's even stranger is that their boots were all soaked with water." It's nice not having the air burn your skin. Unknown author. Edward hadn't been outside for ages. The cold air burns your skin. Edward stood in front of his bunker door, his hand on the freezing steel handle. His mind rolled back to 3 years prior, where Earth was a thriving and peaceful planet, and mankind had united as a whole. Everyone and everything lived in perfect unity. Then, Delta B struck. Delta B was a 3-kilometer-wide asteroid heading for Earth. No one had seen it coming, and when humanity saw it, they had to adapt. So, as the unity they were, they came together and launched several missiles into space in an effort to destroy the asteroid. It worked. But the thing that makes missiles dangerous is the chemicals inside them. The massive number of rockets rocked the world into a nuclear winter, and chemicals mixed amongst the air. The clouds covered the sky, and the global temperature plummeted. Wildlife and plants died out, and soon most of humanity followed. Those who were fortunate enough, such as Edward, made their way into bunkers and hid out there. But when resources became scarce within the walls of those havens, they had to exit and scavenge for food. Edward hadn't been outside for ages, but he had to now. He gripped his warm hand on the cold door handle and pulled it towards him. The air was cold, but it was nice having the air not burning your skin. What Edward didn't know was that glacial temperatures numbs your nerves, and as he felt something itchy on his face, he scratched his face, and something came off. A thick, pink piece of skin. I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel for your overwhelming generosity. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories and poems to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess.ofdarkness and Twitter at duchessofdarkn2. I want to thank all my listeners for your kindness, your encouragement, and your support. It means the world to me. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.